The twin suns of Verida cast long shadows across the metallic desert as Lena Harrow brushed sand from her excavation tools. The ruins of the command headquarters stretched before her, like the skeleton of some ancient beast, its twisted metal beams reaching toward the amber sky. 100 years had passed since the Alliance War ended, yet the scars remained etched into the planet's surface, like permanent reminders of humanity's capacity for destruction. Lena adjusted her field scanner and stepped carefully through the debris field. As a young archaeologist specializing in war relics, she had spent countless hours in places like this, but something about the command site felt different. Perhaps it was the stories her grandmother used to tell her as a child, vague whispers about soldiers who never came home, about secrets buried beneath the sand. The year 122 TL marked a century since the Battle of Kryos Bridge, the final engagement that had supposedly ended the war. Official records claimed total victory, complete enemy surrender, and the heroic sacrifice of the 47th Infantry Division. But Lena had learned to distrust official records. They had a way of sanitizing the messiness of truth. Her scanner beeped insistently as she approached a collapsed section of the command bunker. The readings indicated a metallic object buried approximately 3 meters below the surface. Lena set down her equipment and began the methodical process of excavation, her trained hands working with practiced precision despite the growing excitement in her chest. Hours passed before her shovel struck something solid. A rectangular container, its surface scarred by time, and battle emerged from the sand like a surfacing submarine. Lena's breath caught as she recognized the markings: 47th Infantry Division personal effects. With trembling fingers, she worked the corroded latches until they finally gave way with a metallic shriek. Inside, wrapped in what had once been a waterproof covering, lay a battered combat helmet. The polymer surface was cracked and discolored, bearing the unmistakable marks of energy weapon discharge. But it was what she found inside the helmet that stopped her heart completely. Etched into the inner surface in crude but legible letters were 4 words that defied everything she thought she knew about the war. "Find me. I'm alive." The message was signed with a name writer. Lena stared at the inscription until her eyes watered. According to every historical record, every memorial, every official account, the 47th Infantry Division had been completely wiped out. No survivors, no prisoners. Just heroes who died for the cause. Yet, here was evidence suggesting otherwise, a desperate plea carved by someone who believed they might still be found. The implications sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the desert wind. If one soldier had survived, if the official story was incomplete or deliberately falsified, what other truths lay buried beneath the sands of Verida? That night, back in her temporary research station, Lena contacted the Central Museum archives. The holographic interface flickered to life, and she submitted a query for any records related to a soldier named Ryder from the 47th Infantry Division. The response came back within minutes. No records found. Subject classification expunged. Expunged. Not missing, not lost, but deliberately removed from the archives. Lena felt her pulse quicken. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to erase this person from history. But why? She tried alternate spellings, different search parameters, even cross-referenced with casualty lists from other divisions. Nothing. It was as if this writer had never existed at all. But the helmet was real, and the inscription was genuine. Her archaeological training had taught her to authenticate artifacts, and every test confirmed what her instincts already knew. This was no hoax. 3 days later, Lena found herself standing outside a modest dwelling on the outskirts of New Kryos, the capital city that had risen from the ashes of the old. She had tracked down Cale Morrison, a former military engineer who had specialized in medical robotics during the war. If anyone might have information about soldiers who had gone missing, it would be someone who had worked in battlefield medicine. Cale was older than she had expected, his weathered face bearing the deep lines of someone who had seen too much. His cybernetic left arm, a crude wartime replacement, whirred softly as he gestured for her to enter. Ryder, he repeated when she showed him the helmet. His expression grew distant, as if he were seeing ghosts. I haven't heard that name in a very long time. You knew him. Knew him, girl. I saved his life. Or thought I did. Cale moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of synthetic whiskey, pouring himself a generous measure. The Battle of Creos Bridge was supposed to be a straightforward operation. The 47th was to secure the eastern approach, while the main force crossed. But intelligence was wrong. They walked into an ambush. Lena leaned forward, her archaeologist's instincts alert to every detail. What happened to the survivors? Officially, there weren't any. Cale's laugh was bitter. But I was part of the emergency medical response team. We found 17 soldiers alive in the aftermath, most of them critical. Ryder was among them, barely clinging to life, from massive trauma to his nervous system. What did you do with them? Cale's expression darkened. What we were ordered to do. The command structure had already committed to the narrative of total sacrifice. Heroes who died for the cause. A clean story for the history books. Living broken soldiers complicated that narrative. The pieces began to fall into place in Lena's mind, forming a picture she didn't want to accept. They were silenced. Not killed, if that's what you're thinking. At least not directly. Cale set down his glass with a heavy thud. We had experimental cryogenic preservation technology originally designed for transporting critically wounded soldiers to better medical facilities. The 17 survivors were placed in stasis supposedly for their own good until proper treatment could be arranged. And they're still there as far as I know, in a classified facility beneath the old Meridian base about 200 kilometers north of here. Been there for 100 years, waiting for a treatment that was never meant to come. Lena felt the room spin slightly. 17 soldiers, including Ryder, potentially still alive, after a century of induced sleep, their existence erased from history to maintain a convenient lie. The magnitude of the cover-up was staggering. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Cale studied her face for a long moment. Because I've been carrying this secret for 100 years and I'm tired of it. Because those boys deserved better than to be forgotten. And because you've got the look of someone who won't let this go. He was right about that. Lena left Kyle's house with her mind racing, already formulating a plan. The Meridian base was technically a restricted archaeological site, but her credentials might get her access. If not, she would have to be creative. It took 2 weeks to forge the necessary documentation. Lena had never considered herself particularly skilled at deception, but desperation proved an excellent teacher. The forged research permit was not her finest work, but it would pass casual inspection. The real challenge would be accessing the underground facilities without triggering security protocols. The abandoned Meridian base sprawled across several square kilometers of wasteland, its above-ground structures long since stripped for salvage. But Lena knew that military installations often had significant underground components designed to survive orbital bombardment. If Cale was right, the cryogenic facility would be deep below, probably powered by an independent fusion reactor that could run for centuries. She approached during the early morning hours, when the automated security systems would be at their least active. The main entrance was sealed, but a careful survey revealed several maintenance access points. One of them, partially concealed by a collapsed wall, showed signs of recent use. The descent into the underground complex was like traveling backward through time. The corridors were pristine, maintained by automated systems that had continued their work long after the base was officially abandoned. Emergency lighting cast an eerie blue glow over polished metal walls, and the air carried the sterile scent of recycled atmosphere. Lena followed the main corridor until she reached a junction marked with biohazard symbols and military clearance codes. Beyond this point, she was trespassing in the most serious sense of the word. But the thought of Ryder and the 16 other soldiers suspended in artificial sleep for a crime that was not their own drove her forward. The cryogenic facility was vast, far larger than she had expected. Row upon row of stasis pods stretched into the shadows, most of them dark and inactive. But in the center section, 17 pods hummed with quiet efficiency, their status displays showing stable readings after a century of operation. Lena approached the nearest pod and peered through the transparent, aluminum viewing port. Inside, perfectly preserved, lay a young man who couldn't have been more than 25 when he was placed in stasis. His uniform bore the insignia of the 47th Infantry Division, and his name tag read Martinez. She moved down the row, checking each pod in turn. Jackson, Patel, Nguyen, Torres. Each one a person with a story, a family, a life that had been stolen from them and hidden away. And finally, at the end of the row, she found the pod she was looking for. The name tag read Ryder K. Through the viewing port, she could see a man with strong features and prematurely gray hair, though whether the gray was from age or trauma, she couldn't tell. His hands were folded across his chest, and even in stasis, there was something defiant about his expression. As she studied his face, Lena felt an odd sense of familiarity, as if she were looking at a distant relative. The feeling was so strong that she found herself pulling out her personal scanner and running a quick genetic comparison against the biological samples maintained in the pod's monitoring system. The results made her stagger backward. DNA compatibility 89%. Familial relationship grandfather. The room seemed to tilt around her as the implications sank in. Ryder wasn't just some forgotten soldier. He was her grandfather, the man her grandmother had mourned for a century, believing him dead on a distant battlefield. The vague stories from her childhood suddenly made perfect sense. Her grandmother had known something was wrong with the official story, had passed down whispers of doubt that had eventually led Lena to archaeology, to a career spent uncovering hidden truths. Quite a touching family reunion. Lena spun around to find Director Tyrion of the Archive Authority, standing at the entrance to the facility, flanked by 6 armed security officers. The director was a thin man with calculating eyes, and his expression suggested he was not particularly surprised to find her there. Dr. Harrow, or should I say granddaughter of Technician Specialist Kieran Ryder, 47th Infantry Division. Tyrion stepped closer, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Did you really think we weren't monitoring your research? Your grandmother's queries about missing soldiers? Your archaeological expeditions to war sites? You've been watching my family for 100 years. The accusation came out as a whisper. Watching, yes. Protecting the integrity of historical records. Maintaining social stability. Tyrion gestured toward the rows of stasis pods. These 17 individuals represent a threat to the carefully maintained narrative that has kept our society functioning for a century. The story of noble sacrifice of heroes who died for a greater cause. That story has value. It provides meaning. It's a lie. It's a necessary lie. Tyrion's tone remained calm, conversational. The truth is that the 47th Infantry Division was sacrificed deliberately. Command knew it was an ambush. They sent those soldiers anyway because the broader strategic situation required a distraction, a dramatic gesture to cover a more important operation elsewhere. The truth is that your grandfather and his comrades died not as heroes, but as pawns in a political game. Lena felt anger building in her chest, hot and righteous. Then why keep them alive? Why not just let them die? Because someone in the medical corps had a conscience. Someone thought they might be needed as witnesses someday, or perhaps they simply couldn't bring themselves to commit murder. Tyrion shrugged. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that the truth stays buried. The security officers began to advance, but Lena was already moving. Her hands flew over the cryogenic control panel, initiating an emergency revival sequence for Ryder's pod. Alarms began to sound as the system protested the unauthorized activation, but the process had already begun. Stop her! Tyrion's composure cracked for the first time. The security officers rushed forward, but Lena had positioned herself behind the pod, using it as cover. The revival process was automated, once initiated, and nothing short of destroying the pod itself could stop it now. The stasis field began to dissipate, and Ryder's body started the slow process of returning to consciousness. "You don't understand what you're doing," Tyrion called out. "These men have been in stasis for a century. Their minds may not survive the revival process. And even if they do, what life can they have in a world that has moved on without them?" "That's their choice to make," Lena shot back, keeping her grandfather's pod between herself and the advancing officers. "Not yours." The pod's monitoring systems began to chime, as Ryder's vital signs shifted from stasis to active patterns. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then gradually sharpening with awareness. When his gaze found Lena's face through the transparent aluminum, his expression shifted from confusion to wonder. The pod seal released with a soft hiss, and Ryder sat up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse from disuse, but steady. "How long?" "100 years," Lena replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "Grandfather." Ryder's eyes widened as he took in her features, seeing the family resemblance that time had carved into her bones. "Sarah's granddaughter?" "Yes." He swung his legs over the side of the pod, testing his strength. The military-grade medical nanites that had maintained his body during stasis had done their work well. He appeared to be in the same physical condition as when he had been placed in the pod. Only his eyes showed the weight of time, the deep weariness of someone who had seen too much. "The 47th, he asked. "Officially, you all died heroes at Cryos Bridge." Ryder's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Heroes? Is that what they called us?" He looked around at the other pods, his expression growing hard. "We were bait. Command knew exactly what they were sending us into." "I know," Lena said, "and now the whole world is going to know." Tyrion had been listening to their exchange with growing agitation. Now, he stepped forward, his facade of calm completely abandoned. "You cannot release this information. The social implications would be catastrophic. The government that ordered this operation may be gone, but the institutions built on its narrative remain. You would destroy the foundation of our entire post-war society." "Good," Ryder said, standing fully and facing the director. His century of sleep had not diminished the authority in his voice. "If your society is built on lies and the sacrifice of innocence, then it deserves to fall." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but at that moment the facility's automated systems chose to intervene. The emergency revival sequence had triggered multiple safety protocols, and the computer's AI had concluded that the situation represented a threat to the preserved personnel. Blast doors began to seal throughout the complex, separating Tyrion and his officers from Lena and Ryder. "The system is designed to protect the occupants," Ryder explained with grim satisfaction. "Something the engineers who built this place apparently took more seriously than the politicians who ordered it." With the immediate threat neutralized, Lena turned her attention to the other 16 pods. "What about your comrades?" Ryder moved to the nearest pod, studying the occupants' medical readouts. "They deserve the choice, but revival is traumatic and not everyone will want to face a world that has forgotten them." Working together, they activated the revival sequence for 3 more pods, selecting soldiers whose medical indicators suggested the highest probability of successful awakening. The process would take several hours, giving them time to plan their next move. "They'll find another way in," Lena warned. "Tyrion won't give up easily." "No, he won't. But we have advantages he doesn't expect." Ryder moved to a control console and began accessing the facility's computer systems. "I helped design some of the security protocols for this place. And more importantly, I have something he fears more than anything." "What's that?" "The truth and the means to spread it." Over the next several hours, as the first of Ryder's comrades began to awaken, Lena uploaded terabytes of classified documents to a secure network of independent journalists and historians. The files included not only the records of the 47th Infantry Division's true fate, but evidence of dozens of other cover-ups, falsified reports, and sanitized histories. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, news feeds across Verida were broadcasting the story of the forgotten soldiers. Public opinion, carefully managed for a century, began to shift as citizens confronted the possibility that their understanding of history had been deliberately manipulated. Ryder and three of his awakened comrades shared their story with the world, describing the ambush at Cryos Bridge, the deliberate sacrifice of their unit, and their century of hidden imprisonment. Their words carried the weight of lived experience, impossible to dismiss or discredit. But the real impact came from the questions their story raised about official narratives in general. If the heroic sacrifice of the 47th Infantry Division was a lie, what other lies had been accepted as truth? What other inconvenient realities had been buried to maintain social stability? The government's response was swift and predictable. Officials denounced the revelations as enemy propaganda, ancient history, with no relevance to the modern world. They painted Ryder and his comrades as traumatized victims, whose century of stasis had damaged their ability to recall events accurately. But public opinion had already shifted beyond their control. Mass demonstrations erupted in major cities, demanding access to classified historical archives. Opposition political parties called for investigations into government transparency and accountability. The carefully maintained narrative that had defined post-war society began to crumble. Through it all, Lena remained at her grandfather's side, helping him navigate a world that had changed beyond recognition during his century of sleep. The process was not easy for either of them. Ryder struggled with technology that seemed magical, social changes that challenged his understanding of human nature, and the grief of outliving everyone he had once known. For Lena, the revelations about her family history forced her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about herself. Her choice of archaeology, her obsession with uncovering hidden truths, her grandmother's vague stories about soldiers who never came home, all of it suddenly made sense as pieces of a larger pattern. 3 months after Ryder's awakening, they stood together on a hill, overlooking the site where the Cryos Bridge had once spanned a great river. The bridge itself was long gone, destroyed in the battle, but a memorial had been erected to commemorate the heroic sacrifice of the 47th Infantry Division. "They'll have to change the inscription," Lena observed, looking at the monument's polished stone surface. "Will they?" Ryder's tone was skeptical. "Or will they find some way to maintain the fiction while acknowledging the inconvenient truth?" It was a fair question. Already government spokesmen were attempting to reframe the narrative, suggesting that the soldiers' sacrifice was no less heroic for being based on flawed intelligence, that the cover-up had been motivated by a desire to spare families additional grief rather than political calculation. "The truth has a way of persisting," Lena said, "even when people try to bury it. Your grandmother used to say something similar." Ryder smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she had seen from him since his awakening. She never believed the official story. Always said she could feel that something was wrong, that I was still out there somewhere. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the twin suns set over the memorial to a lie that was slowly being transformed into something resembling truth. In the distance, construction crews were working to expand the site, adding sections that would acknowledge the complexity of what had happened at Cryos Bridge. "What happens now?" Lena asked. "Now we continue the work," Ryder replied. "There are still 13 soldiers sleeping in that facility, waiting for someone to give them the choice of whether to return to a world that has moved on without them. There are other sites, other buried truths, other families who deserve to know what really happened to their loved ones. And if the authorities try to stop us..." Ryder's expression hardened with the determination that had kept him alive through the ambush at Cryos Bridge and sustained him through a century of enforced sleep. "Then we remind them that the truth belongs to everyone, not just those in power, and that some battles are worth fighting no matter how long they take to win." As they walked back toward their transport, Lena felt the weight of her grandfather's helmet in her pack, the artifact that had started her journey toward this moment. The inscription inside, "Find me, I'm alive," had proven more literal than she could have imagined when she first discovered it in the desert ruins. But more than that, it had proven to be a promise fulfilled across time, a testament to the power of hope and the persistence of truth. In a world built on comfortable lies, sometimes the most radical act was simply remembering what had been deliberately forgotten. The work ahead would not be easy. There would be resistance from those who profited from the existing order threats, from those who feared the destabilizing power of truth, and the constant challenge of separating fact from propaganda in a society that had been built on carefully constructed narratives. But Lena and Ryder had something their opponents lacked: the certainty that came from having touched authentic truth, from having seen with their own eyes the gap between official history and lived reality. That certainty would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As they drove back toward New Cryos, the lights of the city sparkling in the distance like stars fallen to earth, Lena thought about the helmet's inscription one more time. The words had been meant as a desperate plea from a forgotten soldier to anyone who might find him. But they had become something more: a rallying cry for all those who refused to accept comfortable lies in place of difficult truths. "Find me, I'm alive." The words echoed across a century, a reminder that some things could not be buried no matter how deep the grave or how long the wait. Truth, like life itself, had a way of surfacing when least expected, demanding recognition and refusing to be ignored. And in a universe where political convenience too often triumphed over justice, that was perhaps the most important truth of all.